Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Um, so as always, as I like to start off, just a huge thank you to everyone who's been watching, everyone who's been sharing, liking, commenting. I always read your comments, so feel free to leave one down below. Just let me know if there's any cases you want me to cover, any information that you feel that I might have missed out if you've heard about these cases. Also, we're coming up to the year anniversary of the channel, so that's always a bonus. And obviously I've got a real big story planned for the year anniversary. So with all that said and done, just a massive thank you. If you are watching and you haven't subscribed yet, please hit that subscription button. It doesn't cost you anything, and I would never ask you guys for money, but a subscription is always free and it really helps me out. So please feel free to hit that subscription button. So today's case, we're going to be focusing on the crimes of Philip Smith. I am hoping this one that you guys are not familiar with. I know they're the ones that I usually get the most comments on, and the ones that you guys haven't really heard of before. So here's hoping you haven't heard of this one. Quite a shocker. So with all that said and done, I'm just going to get into the story of Philip Smith. So Philip John Smith, he was born on the 10th of July 1965 in Gloucester, and that was to parents Henry and Rose, and he was the oldest of their 5 children. The family originally lived on Midland Road in Gloucester, so if that sounds familiar to you, it's because they were actually neighbours and friends of Fred and Rose West. And in 1971, the family then moved to a housing estate called Coney Hill. And shortly after that, Henry had a biking accident, and this left him unable to work. And this left the family in severe financial difficulty and dire straits. And Philip attended Coney Hill Infant School, and this was then being transferred to a special needs school for children with learning difficulties, which is something really common around this time. And he ended up leaving school at 14 to join Billy Dunter's fun fair. So Billy Dunter was one of his neighbours, and this man owned a fun fair that used to travel around the UK, and Philip ends up joining him and going on to pursue a career in being a fun fair worker. And he was able to obviously tour around the UK during this. And when he wasn't touring, Philip worked as a farmhand. He was also a labourer and also dabbled in being a security guard. As a young adult, Philip settled into a relationship. And this woman, she hasn't been named for whatever reason, I don't know. But what I do know is that they had 3 children between 1990 and 1992. But Philip eventually left his family after the relationship became really difficult. And I'm not 100% clear if he kept in contact with his children after this. So he then moves to Cardiff, and then goes to Country Westmeath in Ireland, sorry. And he was hitchhiking here when he meets a family who then takes him in. And they allowed him to stay in a caravan rent-free, and he just made small food contributions for his benefits. And eventually he was asked to leave the property after he was caught making members of the family really uncomfortable. He was making sexual comments about some of the women that were in the family, and the family just had enough of this and they asked him to leave, understandably. In 1999, he moves to Birmingham, and he briefly stays with some workers in the Trinity Centre, which is a homeless hostel in Digbeth. And eventually he moves into a housing association home in Braithwaite Road in Sparkbrook. And Philip became really well known locally. He was a regular punter of the Shamrock Cafe in Stratford Road and also the Rainbow Pub in Digbeth. And eventually, through this, he became employed by the pub on a casual basis as an odd job man. And he was also worked as an unlicensed taxi driver for the customers. So, beginning in 1984, Philip he began amassing a huge amount of criminal convictions. These mainly for handling stolen goods, burglaries, driving without a license. His first conviction resulted in him receiving a £100 fine. Now, by the millennium, Philip was said to have now been around 6'4". He weighed around 22 stone and was said to have had a dishevelled appearance with a soft West Country accent. But to those who met Philip, he was described as a gentle giant. In an interview with the Birmingham Evening Mail in 2001, the owner of the Shamrock Cafe, a man called Jim Smith, who wasn't any relation, he said that Philip was a gentle giant we named Bigfoot because his boots would always leave black marks on my floor. 99% of the time, he had a dirty appearance and looked as if he'd been working on a car. And they just, when obviously this story broke out around the town, they couldn't believe that this was the same person that was capable of this. So now we're going to get into obviously what he was convicted for finally. On the 8th of November 2000, Philip meets a young woman called Jodie Hyde. She was a 21-year-old recovering butane gas addict who lived in Alum Rock. Now the pair met whilst drinking at the Rainbow Pub, and she was actually last seen in the Rainbow Pub leaving with Philip. He's then seen later talking to Jodie and taking her to a hospital appointment. And later on that evening, Jodie had died. Now it's believed, and obviously a lot of this is from police speculation because obviously Philip never ever admitted the truth. He never spoke about his crimes. He never took any culpability of his crimes. But it's believed Philip had later taken Jodie back to his home and killed her by strangling her. He then took her body to a recreational ground near Golden Hillock Road in Sparkbrook. He rolled her up in a carpet and then set her on fire. And this is his way of burning the evidence. Setting fire to something is a real good way of obviously destroying any evidence that's on it. It doesn't completely eradicate it. 9 times out of 10, there's always a little something that investigators can find. But most of the time, it's really good at destroying any sort of evidence. At 6:15 the next morning, the still smouldering remains of Jodie were found by 2 police officers. Now, due to the damage from the fire, her body had to be ID'd from fingerprints. So on one of her hands, she managed to retain some skin on one of her fingers or a few of her fingers, and they were able to identify her body through this skin. 3 days later, on November the 11th, Philip is back in the Rainbow Pub, and then he meets a 25-year-old woman called Rosemary Kokaris, who lived in Castle Vale. Now again, Philip and Rosemary are seen leaving together, and they are later seen going into a nightclub. Rosemary is last seen real highly drunk, and she's being pulled into the vehicle by Philip. He drives her to Worcestershire Park, and he pulls her out of the car and begins bludgeoning her to death with a blunt instrument. He then gets back into his car and he runs over Rosie's body numerous times. And the next morning, her body is found by a dog walker laying in a ditch near the Junction 5 of the M15. And before the police could begin investigating Rosemary's murder that morning, at 10 to 7 that day, Philip murders his third victim, and this one was chosen completely at random. So this was a mother of 6, Carol Jordan. She was 39 years old and she worked as a care worker. And all she was doing was she was on her way to work, and Philip just chooses her from random and hits her in his car from behind. This collision with the car fractured her hip, and in an attempt to get away with this, Philip then pulls Carol into his car. He takes her away to another location and he begins beating and stamping on her body. He then dumps her in a park next to the Bell Barn Road, and she's found 10 to 9 the next day. Due to the horrific damage done to her face by the beating and stamping, Carol had to be ID'd by her dental records. So on the 13th of November, Philip goes back to the Rainbow Pub where he's told about Rosemary's disappearance. And Philip then calls the Carterville police station at 4 p.m, saying that he wants to give a statement. And this was just a few hours before Rosie's body had been ID'd. So DC Ruth Wilkins spoke about this phone call later on. She said that he rung up and said that he would like to come into the police station to help with the inquiry, and that he had seen Rosemary on the Saturday night, leaving the pub with an unknown man. He insisted he would like to come over to the police station, and that he had been asked to contact the police by someone else, and he then gave over his mobile number. Now, in his statement to the police, Philip admitted to being at the pub with Rosemary and another man, but later on they had separated and they had gone to another pub called the Kerryman. And the man was rejected from the pub, so they said went to a nightclub called Monte Carlo's in Handsworth, and they left quite some time later, according to Philip. He said that Rosemary was then confronted by another man, described as a teddy boy, who she'd actually argued earlier on with in the Kerryman. Philip later said that this man became really aggressive and asked Rosemary if she wanted to go home. When Rosemary said that she didn't want to go, Philip left her at Monte Carlo's and made his own way home. So this statement then put Philip into the suspect list, and soon a murder investigation was launched. And this was named Operation Green, and this was led by Sir Edward Crewe, who at the time was Chief Constable of West Midlands Police. And this included over 100 police officers and 50 support workers. And this was from various different units within the West Midlands. So detectives watched over hundreds and hundreds of hours of footage. They conducted 100 interviews with witnesses. Evidence was sent to Forensic Science Service in Birmingham. Then a man called Martin Whitaker, who led the team that was doing the Forensic Science Service, spoke about the sheer amount of evidence. He said that the team pulled together every strand of evidence to create a spider's web, and at the centre of this spider web was Philip Smith. In 20 years of working for the Forensic Service, I have never had to deal with so much evidence in relation to one suspect. It was really overwhelming. So when he came to being questioned, Philip maintained an innocence. However, detectives quickly gathered evidence linking him to Jodie, Rosemary and Carol. Now, witnesses had said they saw him leave the Rainbow with Jodie and Rosemary, and Philip was definitely the last person to see them alive. CCTV footage around Birmingham showed his distinctive car visiting locations that were linked to the investigation. And one piece of evidence showed Jody getting out of the car to visit a chemist. Phillip was then seen in a petrol garage and driving close to the area where Jody's body was later found. Other bits of footage showed Phillip and Rosemary at Monte Carlo's, and she was seen struggling with him and fighting. He was then seen driving around Bromsgrove and returning to Birmingham on the night of Rosemary's death. And 2 witnesses claimed to have seen Phillip with blood on him, and a third said that they saw him at the petrol garage, and a fourth who actually spoke to Phillip about the blood that was on him. And Phillip said that he had been in a fight, but the witness said that Phillip had no other visible injuries. He just happened to have a bit of blood on him. In addition, there was a large amount of forensic evidence linking Phillip to the murders. When looking at his car, forensics uncovered 12 blood samples. These were then matched to blood samples that were found on his clothes, and even samples that were found in his flat. When arrested, police took the boots that he was wearing. So when he was being interviewed, he was wearing a specific pair of boots, and these were taken off him, and they were actually established that these were the same boots he was wearing when he had stamped and kicked on Rosemary and Carol. Evidence found from samples in his bath showed that he attempted to wash the bloodstained clothes in the bath, along with some of Rosemary's clothes. Jody's bag was also found in the rubbish, with its contents emptied out. Detectives looked at the tyre markings of his car and realised that the car had 4 different types of tyre, and that these marks were also matched to the marks that were left at Rosemary's murder scene and the marks left on her and Carol's body after Phillip had run over them. Now, looking at Carol's murder, they've also found paint and glass fragments, which were then linked to the same car. And this indicated a broken light cluster, and this broken light cluster was actually found in the boot of the car. So on the 17th of November 2000, Phillip was then charged with Rosemary's murder. The following day, he was remanded into custody. Police then interviewed him in connection with the murders of Jody and Carol on the 28th of November, and 2 days later, he was charged with their murders. He was then held on remand at HMP Woodhill as a Category A prisoner to await trial. And the trial for Phillip began on the 3rd of July 2001 at Leicester Crown Court. So Phillip, he pled not guilty to the 3 counts of murder, and this led to the prosecution led by Tim Raggett and the defence by Rachel Brands. And on the opening day, Tim, he told the court that the scientific evidence was powerful and compelling, that there was no argument to follow. Like, they had their guy, basically. In defence, Phillip said that the only reason for the blood traces being on his clothes were that the police had tampered with the evidence and fitted him up. Which, you can imagine, like, the court probably hear this a million times a year. Like, the amount of these cases that they deal with, and they probably hear this story numerous times. Someone fitted him up, the police have fitted him up, the police are bullying him, blah, blah, blah. And, you know, an intelligent person is going to know that that bullshit isn't going to wash in the court of law. He said that the clothes that were belonging to Rosemary that were found out at his flat, they had actually been stolen from a bag of clothes left outside an Oxfam, which he had taken. Now, on the 17th of July, Phillip begins complaining that he was unwell and had chest and eye pain. And all the proceedings were halted while he was treated for the symptoms of a panic attack. And when it was finally felt that he was well enough to return to the stand, he said that he wished to speak to his barrister. Now, the judge told him to answer questions, to which he replied, "I want to change my plea. I'm fed up with this. I want to change my plea." The charges were then reread the following day, and Phillip pled not guilty. On the 18th of July 2001, he was eventually sentenced to life with a minimum term of 35 years to serve before even being considered for parole. So it's not 35 years he's going to be released, it's 35 years before he can be eligible for parole. But obviously, if they still see him as a danger, then he's got no chance. In his sentencing remarks, the judge stated that "you robbed 3 innocent ladies of their lives. I suspect that their families will suffer more as they don't understand why you did this. The brutality of the deaths designed by you to evade discovery showed the coldness in which you dispatched of them. This is appalling. You should clearly face up like a man at the overwhelming nature of the crown against you, but you chose to put the victims' families through misery, which you compounded by this trial. The motive for the murders remain unclear, but it's believed that a lack of sexual relations had been a contributing factor." So as a result of the inquiries into Phillip's background, police then reopened an investigation into a possible fourth victim. So this was a 47-year-old mum of 2 called Patricia Lynott. Patricia had moved from Athlone in Ireland to Birmingham in the mid-90s, and by 2000 she was actually employed at a Rainbow pub, where she worked as a cleaner and also as a childminder to the landlord. She was known to have had a few drinks with Phillip after work, and on the 23rd of October she was actually found dead in her bedroom in Borders Green. Initially, her death was put down to natural causes, as a post-mortem failed to show any cause to her body, and her body was actually sent back to Ireland for burial. Now, because Patricia and Phillip had worked together, police wanted to re-examine the case. So the Irish authorities were then asked for a new post-mortem, and Patricia's body had to be exhumed. Now, this happened on the 8th of March 2001. And this was sent to a morgue in Dublin. And however, pathologist John Harbinson, he still couldn't find a conclusive diagnosis as to why she had died. An inquest into Patricia's death was then held at Birmingham Coroner Court in January 2003. The hearing was told that marks on her back and her arms may have been bruising from a struggle, but a pathologist had conducted that the original post-mortem couldn't reach a conclusion on death, as her body had actually been undiscovered for about a week. It was also said that despite her connection with Phillip, police have failed to establish that she had been murdered. The jury then returned as an open verdict, and police also conducted a routine examination of other unsolved murder cases dating back to the 80s, and these were all in areas where Phillip had lived. West Midlands Police then held a conference in 2001 with representatives from several forces, including the West Mercia and Gloucestershire Police, to share any information in the unsolved murders. Detectives interviewed Phillip around 3 times, but he obviously refused to help them with any inquiries. The only information that I can find on Phillip after his arrest and imprisonment came in 2005. It was an article that stated that Phillip had decided to change his plea originally in 2001 due to a plea deal that he entered. Now, police reportedly agreed to return the £400 to him that was confiscated during his arrest. And Phillip said that the only reason he wanted this money to be put into his prison spends, because he wanted to spend the money on Mars bars. I mean, I don't know how many Mars bars you can actually buy for £400, but you know, he's not going to be seeing daylight for another few years yet, so why not get as big as a blue whale? So unfortunately, that is all I've got for you guys today with this case. Apologies, it is a short one. Just a few things that are going on at the moment, but I don't want to give up on doing this because you guys are my escapism. I have got something real epic and a real big story coming up for the year anniversary of the channel, but this was quite a difficult one. Even though it's a UK case, it was a real difficult one to get the information that I could find. So if you feel that you want to add anything in, if you feel that I've missed anything out, which I probably have, please feel free to comment down below. Give me a share, give me a like, and please subscribe. And I will see you guys very, very soon for the next true crime story with Silhouette. Stay safe, and I'll see you soon.